Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Worrell, and on behalf of the National AI Centre, we welcome you to today's webinar. Today, we will be exploring human rights and AI. We are joined by two very, very special guests, Australia's Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, and from NAB, we've got Jade, who looks after privacy and data ethics. Before we get started today, I just want to acknowledge that we all meet today on the traditional lands of the Indigenous people of Australia. I get to enjoy the privilege of living on the Kaurna lands down here in South Australia. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also recognise and acknowledge any Indigenous people on the call today. So as I said, today we will have a very exciting agenda, and we know that it's exciting because we've had 999 people RSVP for the event, and we may end up with 1,000 on the day, which is fantastic. So I think it really is a demonstration of how interesting and topical this subject is, the issue of human rights in an age of artificial intelligence. As I said, we're very grateful for the contributions and the attendance today from Lorraine Finlay and Jade from National Australia Bank. Before we get into the content today, I did want to touch on the National AI Centre itself. So we were funded by the Department of Industry, Science and Resources about a year ago. We sit within the CSIRO and Data 61. I want to acknowledge and thank all of my CSIRO and Data 61 colleagues today on the call. It's fantastic being part of the National Science Agency of Australia, but most importantly, we work with industry as well. To help inform what we do, we spend a lot of time working with industry and to better understand what we can do to support Australia's movement, adoption and creation of artificial intelligence solutions so that we can compete with this exciting new technology. We're very, very grateful to two foundation members of the National AI Centre, so specifically Google and CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development in Australia. So thank you very much for your contributions and support of our work. In terms of what we actually do on a day-to-day basis, we're actually a very small team, I should say, but we spend our time focusing in three particular areas. So we want to make sure that we support small and medium-sized businesses better understand artificial intelligence and understand how it can be of benefit to their organisation. Most importantly, we want them to feel confident in understanding what it can do and to be using this technology in a responsible and ethical way. We also work very closely with entrepreneurs and business development organisations, universities and similar organisations to build Australia's AI ecosystem. And we have an excellent report just published a couple of months ago that demonstrates that our AI ecosystem is growing, and there's so many interesting organisations and technologies emerging from that ecosystem. So I definitely recommend that you visit the National AI Centre website to learn a little bit more about our own ecosystem. And if you're in the market for procuring AI services, definitely consider what you can do to support these Australian-based businesses. The part of the program that I lead is the Responsible AI Network. So this is a network of organisations that help produce and curate content for us that spans a best practice program of the responsible use of AI. We work primarily across 7 different disciplines. So we focus on creating resources and best practice guides in the legal space. We work very closely on standards, and we have a fantastic partnership with Standards Australia. We spend a fair bit of time thinking and talking about human-centred design, and there will be some more resources that we produce to help organisations better understand what they can do to ensure that their AI systems are based around human-centred design. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can support leaders, so company directors and organisational leaders, to really understand the implications, opportunities, and what they can do to manage the risks associated with AI. We also work around principles, technology and governance, and I do want to recognise that we have a number of key partners that we work very, very closely with, including CEDA, the AAAA, the Ethics Centre, Standards Australia, which I referenced earlier, Data 61, the AI Group, Human Technology Institute at UTS, Grading Institute and the Tech Council of Australia. Now, this is not a closed network. We would love to hear from any organisations that have resources, guides, and best practices that they might like to share with the community. I'd also like to recognise that we work very, very closely with industry and leaders in this in the responsible AI space here in Australia. This is a picture of our responsible AI at scale think tank. And we have representatives from technology companies like Microsoft, Google, AWS, IBM, and Atlassian. We include organisations like SEEK and Wesfarmers on our group, as well as IAG. We have a number of banks, including National Australia Bank, Commonwealth Bank, and ANZ. And so this group of very, very smart people get together 4 times a year and help to inform what it is that we do through the Responsible AI Network. You may note that we've got 2 very special guests in this picture, including Lorraine and Finlay and Jade, who is part of our Responsible AI think tank, and they are the speakers today. I do want to quickly touch on that. The government's, the federal government's response to the AI safety process that they went through, the public consultation. And so just about a month ago, there was some information that was published in regard to their response. So late last year, I think they received just over 500 submissions in regards to AI safety. And this subsequent response articulated a way forward whereby they would work with the National AI Centre to articulate an AI safety standard. So that work is underway at the moment, and we are working very, very closely with industry partners to collaborate and put together an AI safety standard, which is some exciting work. And there is also an expert committee, and I think the members of that committee were announced just yesterday. So there's some really good progress being made across this space here in Australia. Now, on to today's subject. So we are talking about human rights in the context of artificial intelligence. And I found this quote on the Australian Human Rights Commission website, which I thought was a really good way of framing up today's conversation. And we hear a lot about technology and the role that it serves in our society. But I think, fundamentally, it should exist to serve humanity. But whether it does or not will depend on how it's deployed, by whom, and to what end, which is a really good way, I hope, of framing today's conversation. So I have mentioned Lorraine and Jade. We are exceptionally excited and privileged to hear from them today. Without further ado, I will hand over to our Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay. Thank you again for your time today, and over to you for your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and good afternoon to everybody. I'd like to echo the earlier acknowledgement that Beth gave of the traditional custodians of the lands from the wide variety of places on which we meet today, from my location in Canberra, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people taking part in this webinar today. It's such a great pleasure to be here on behalf of the Australian Human Rights Commission to talk about the Human Rights Impact Assessment Tool for AI-informed decision-making systems in banking, which is quite a mouthful, but hopefully something that's trying to do something that is in quite a simple and accessible way. But we launched this tool late last year in partnership with NAB, and I always love having opportunities to talk not just about the partnership, but about the practical impact that we really hope this tool will have. Now, I'm told we've had around 1,000 people register for the webinar today. And to me, that demonstrates the really key interest that surrounds the question of how we can ensure that Australia really harnesses the benefits and the potential of AI, while also protecting against the real risks that it poses for both human rights and to individuals more broadly. When you have such a large audience at a webinar, it's really dangerous to start singling people out. But I did want, in giving you the background to this project, to acknowledge one particular person who was really central in initially driving the work of the Commission in this area. So the Human Rights Impact Assessment tool that we're here to talk about today emerged directly from recommendations that were made by the Australian Human Rights Commission as part of our Human Rights and Technology project. And that was a project that was led by my predecessor as the Human Rights Commissioner, Edward Santo. I believe Ed's online today, and he's, of course, continuing his work in this area through his involvement and establishment of the Human Technology Institute at UTS. And he was also announced just yesterday as one of the 12 appointees to the new AI expert group that's been established by the Minister for Industry and Science. And I wanted to take the opportunity to really clearly acknowledge the leadership of Ed in driving the Human Rights and Technology project at the Commission, because it's that project that led to our partnership with NAB and led to the Human Rights Impact Assessment tool. And that project, which you can see a little bit about it on the screen in front of you now, was a multi-year national initiative that examined the broad human rights risks that were posed by new and emerging technology, including AI, and it resulted in the final report that was published towards the end of 2021. The starting point in that report, which guides all of our work in this area, is that technology is essential, but that it has to be fair. And that while we're living in a time of unprecedented technological innovation and transformation, and we need to seize the opportunities that presents, we also need to recognise the significant risk that these technologies can pose to our human rights and the serious harm that can be caused to individuals. Given this, it's absolutely essential that we put human rights at the heart of technology, and that human rights considerations are embedded at every single step along the way of the technology life cycle. What the report does is to present a roadmap for responsible innovation. So it's all about allowing us to realise the benefits from new technology, trying to encourage innovation, but also protecting our human rights at the same time. And these findings have only become more significant in the time that's passed since the report was released in 2021, with AI technology in those few years having really developed exponentially and moving into the mainstream public consciousness with the release of ChatGPT and other large language model AI chatbots really last year. The final report made 38 recommendations, and if we could move to the next slide, Beth, it included the recommendation that private sector bodies should be encouraged to undertake human rights impact assessments before using AI systems, and that tools should be developed to assist them in doing so. Since the release of the report, we've worked really hard to not just leave it sitting on a shelf, but to actually try to give it practical effect. And one of the ways we've sought to do this is to work with private sector and with industry to actually bring the recommendations to life and to provide the assistance and guidance and tools that are needed to operationalise human rights principles when it comes to emerging technologies. One example from last year is the guidance resource on AI and discrimination in insurance pricing and underwriting that we produced in partnership with the Actuaries Institute. And another example that we're here to talk about today is our partnership with NAB to produce the HRIA tool for AI-informed decision-making systems in banking. Before we go into the tool itself, I did just want to pause and take a moment to thank the staff at the Commission, past and present, who worked on this project, in particular Llewellyn Spink, Bruce Alston and Patrick Hooton. And I also really wanted to thank everybody at NAB and all of the AI technology and banking industry experts who came together to really generously provide their expertise to assist with this project and provide that really nice melding of technical expertise with practical relevance. And in particular, I'd like to thank Jade, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, without whom I have no doubt this project would never have actually happened and certainly would never have been seen through to completion. So if we go to the next slide, if we're going to have an Australia that is a leader in responsible and ethical AI, then we really need to have government, business and civil society all coming together to ensure practical impact. And our partnership with NAB, to my mind, is a really positive example of the way we can all work together to ensure that we're not just leaders in innovation, but we're leaders in responsible and ethical innovation. So what is a HRIA tool and why are they important? In brief, and I'd really encourage you to use the link, and I believe that's been provided to everybody, to have a look at the tool and really explore it, because it is a tool that's designed to be used and to start conversations. But in essence, a HRIA tool assesses how a new product, service, law or policy will engage with human rights, and it provides a framework to ensure adequate human rights protections. These tools help to measure the risk to human rights posed by business systems and activities. They ensure measures are put in place to address those risks, and they support the availability of remedies for any human rights infringements. HRIAs are similar to other impact assessments that will already be familiar to businesses, like privacy impact assessments under privacy legislation, but they're more comprehensive in terms of addressing the full range of human rights engaged by AI-informed decision-making, which in the case of this tool includes particularly issues around non-discrimination and equality of treatment. Our hope is that tools like this will help to identify and address human rights issues at the earliest stage of the design, development and deployment of AI-informed decision-making systems, and in this way will not only prevent harm from occurring to individuals, but will also reduce the risk for business and hopefully embed human rights as an ordinary part of the day-to-day decision-making processes. The tool takes the form of a series of questions that are designed to draw out relevant information for consideration by banks when they're assessing the human rights impact of their use of AI systems. And the questions themselves are accompanied by commentary that explains and contextualises them, and that provides an opportunity to seek out further information and directs you to that if it's needed. In this way, the tool isn't designed to be the final answer. It's not designed to be a box that's ticked off and that you can move on from. Instead, it's designed to be a conversation starter that you can use and return to, that can help deepen your understanding of the human rights impacts that may be occurring, and that offers you practical guidance about how you can address those impacts and what mitigation strategies might be available to help ensure that adverse impacts are appropriately addressed and suitably looked at. It's designed to be a guide to good practice, and it's also designed not to be just another regulatory step that you have to take, but more importantly, to be incorporated within the existing governance framework and the existing systems that are already in place across, in this case, a bank. There are 43 specific questions that form the tool. And I have to admit, when I was first adding them up and when we were looking at how comprehensive the tool would be, I know Jade and I had a lot of conversations about, that's really overwhelming. You know, when you start to talk about doing human rights assessments in business, it can seem like a really big step to have to take and something that is completely overwhelming. What this tool is designed to do is to make human rights tangible and to hopefully give businesses the confidence of how to take that first step, how to engage in the conversation, and how to incorporate human rights best practice into day-to-day decision-making in a way that isn't overwhelming, but instead is practical, is accessible, and is really tailored to risk. So we hope that this tool is a really valuable and practical resource, and we hope that it contributes to the continuing and really important conversation in Australia about ensuring AI is used in responsible and ethical ways. And I think for me, the heart of this is that when we talk about human rights, it's really important to remember these aren't just theoretical concepts, and they aren't just legal hurdles that we have to tick the box on and make sure that we address. They actually matter because ultimately this is about things that impact people's day-to-day lives. So to my mind, this tool does help businesses protect their brand and reputation, but more importantly, it actually helps ensure that we're not causing serious harm to individuals in the way that we're using AI. And it helps to ensure that we're putting humans at the centre of the technology that we're using. So thank you so much again for having me here to talk to you about the HRAA tool. And I'm really delighted to be able to pass over to Jade to give you some further details from NAB's perspective about how this partnership came into being and how they see the tool being used in their day-to-day operations.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Lorraine. Yeah, kia ora everybody. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Beth. I really appreciate it. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners and custodians past and present, noting that today I'm dialing in from the land of the Wurundjeri peoples, also known as the Woiwurrung language group of the Kulin Nation. And it's on that land that I walk, I work, I share, and I live. I'd also like to pay my respects and welcome any Indigenous people that are joining this webcast. Technology is complex, it's human and it's old. If we just keep the other slide for just a moment. That picture is actually of the fish traps in Brewarina, and it's been in use for almost 40,000 years continuously. And I think it's arguably a really wonderful demonstration of early adoption of technology. And when we talk about perhaps more, I'll put it in commas, recent discoveries like AI, because we know it's not all that recent, I really like framing those types of things and about how I can take the tools and technologies that can impact people, and in this instance, fish traps, and see how they can really assist and support people. So I'm very thankful to be here with Commissioner Finlay on this webcast. NAB was very excited and thrilled to be approached by the Human Rights Commission. We really respect the work that they do, and the publication of the technology report absolutely was a catalyst for this engagement. The report, as the Commissioner has outlined, really dedicated a lot of content to how the Commission sees that we should be designing, both from a public and a private entity perspective, how we should be designing the management of AI risks. And reading that and sort of digesting it, we really felt in our Global Privacy Office, that the recommendations within it were things that we would want to support and explore ourselves as a private entity to work through our own data ethics framework. So the Commission's conclusions that AI-informed decision-making should be lawful, transparent, explainable, used reasonably, subject to appropriate human oversight, review, and intervention. Those conclusions to us felt to be really well aligned with our values and data ethics framework. So on the slide right there, you can see our current data ethics principles. NAB's been working on data ethics since about 2018, and we established our first set of data ethics principles in late 2019. And the set that's on here now, it's available on nab.com.au. I think we're going to put the actual link, you'll be provided that as well, so it's easier to find. And that just shows our current thinking. We've been operationalizing data ethics principles now by conducting formal assessments and reviews of data. So the idea for us is that we want to take those data uses and then check, are we aligning to our data ethics principles? And we've been doing that for about 5 years now. We were very lucky back in 2021, I think, to have that diverse discussion with the then Human Rights Commissioner, Ed Santo. And hello, Ed, and congratulations if you're on the line today. Well done on the tech report. And from there, the idea was raised that maybe we could work together to create a tool that would assist banking on understanding the risks of AI And I think one of the big call outs for us in reading the report is that it's really asking for private organisations to step into this area. And so it's a great pleasure that we were able to continue that relationship and develop this partnership with Lorraine and all of her team. And again, I would echo the sentiments earlier. There are a lot of people who were involved over the time, and yeah, many hands make light work, as they say, but I do think having that diversity of view was really what's made this hopefully into something that you all enjoy as well. So thank you. So at NAB, we recognise that when you're developing AI internally, or whether you're exploring a third-party product, you really need to be making sure that you are thinking about the decisions that those tools could make, that they're really carefully considered for bias. You're interrogating the data collection avenue of those tools, and you're as well as considering the expectation from your customers. So again, I think the technology report had a lot to say about the importance of having appropriate governance and accountability, and we really just felt that that partnership would be a great opportunity, not only for us or not only for banks, but definitely for our customers' interests as well. You know, this is really about an education, raising awareness, and we think that the more people feel empowered to understand how these technologies work and how it can impact them, we feel like that's a really powerful thing for all consumers. So we also think that the importance of this really is how we can also build our skill set, how we can measure the risks that are posed by AI activities to human rights, and then be guided as to what are the best strategies to address those risks. As pointed out earlier, I think banks are already heavily regulated, and we also have common law duties. So at NAB, for us at Data Ethics, we don't just apply that to AI. We definitely consider a much broader data use as well under our framework. And to be honest, banks have been using models for a very long time. It's very well known, and we all use varying levels of machine learning. And now, of course, we're all exploring how best that we can use generative AI. So the timing, I think, for a tool like this and this sort of guidance is really great. So now that I've set a bit of scene setting, I'm sure you all want to know, this is what you came for, is to understand perhaps how the tool works in a little bit more detail and how we feel how practically it works too for us in the bank. So one of the main goals is that highlighting or awareness raising. So there are rights, human rights, obviously well-founded in not in international settings, but in Australia. And in banking, we love talking about our customers, and we love saying, you know, talking about putting the customer first. But the way the language here is really being reframed. It's focusing on human rights. So specifically, we're thinking about concerns of privacy, discrimination, and equality of treatment. And I think it's pretty safe to say that most companies appreciate privacy obligations, but the framing of this to really focus on privacy even as a human right is probably done less often. So the tool here is about framing it right up front, right at the beginning. And it's one of my personal reasons why I like that framing so much, that we're talking about people. And we shouldn't be talking about humanizing machines. We really want to use our own advantage here, which is about human rights. We are already humans, so we have the advantage here to use it. And I think framing your risk assessments really against impacts to humans, benefits to humans, and of course harms to human rights, it really puts the lens right at the beginning to think about unforeseen consequences, because it impacts us all. So the tool calls out specific rights, laws, and guidance to consider, which you can do in your own time. It's not something that you need to quickly go and do all at once. And there's also a bunch of commission references to read, a lot of really good guidance, like I say, already out there on the Australian Human Rights Commission's website, which you may not know of. So this tool is another lovely way of sort of complementing and joining things together. The next focus is this idea of pre-screening. So let's have a threshold, because if you are going to do a deeper review, it's really important that you don't have to feel like you have to go to the length of that very deep review if you're applying it to necessarily every single activity related to AI. The threshold is about making sure you're considering human rights. If the AI that's making decisions has a legal or significant effect on individuals. Now that's a higher threshold. And that's again complementing the recommendations in the Human Rights Commission's technology report. And my practical perspective on this is, if you haven't done a lot of impact assessments and you're sort of coming to this perhaps fairly new, it's just a useful exercise to apply it broadly. So, you know, really, it's an opportunity to help people speak in the same language, get those ideas right from the beginning about understanding the impacts to human rights. And so I would definitely promote the fact of trying to consider this guidance for whatever sort of activity you might be doing, but there is absolutely a threshold here for materiality. Ideally, what we'd love is that the conversations, which is again the sort of like whole point of the guidance, is to start those conversations, that they become about the impacts on, you know, when we're talking about harms to human rights, that those conversations start to feel more natural, that they start to feel ultimately expected right when you're doing your design work, your development, and then ultimately with release. So again, I support the idea of trying to think about as using this as a real foundational piece to your learning and awareness as well. The tool moves on with questions to discuss impacts. So again, like we've called out, that's what the tool's really about, a series of questions. It's not here to give you absolute fixed answers. It's about having that conversation. But the ideas of the questions behind impacts is really for you to start thinking about, are there perhaps cumulative impacts, potentially, say, with age and vulnerability, for instance, whether they're just about an individual, like say a privacy impact, or could this actually be a group impact, perhaps based on ethnicity, an ethnic group. And also thinking about legacy issues. I work in banking, so one of the things that comes to mind is historically gender was very underrepresented. Like females were just definitely not represented in the credit decisioning data pools, and that's something that we've had to fix and be aware of. But it's these sorts of questions we hope sort of bring those things to mind, so you're sort of taking on the learnings that other people have already done and hopefully then applying it to your own decisions about what tools are appropriate. So we move on now to the next series of questions, and it's my favorite because it's about data. Here the tool really is getting you to consider your training data right up front, because we all know that if you're going to get value in your end result, it means nothing if the data isn't what you wanted it to be or needed it to be right at the beginning. So it starts at that front end, and data can be a breeding ground for embedding inequality. So that's why it's so important to turn your mind to it. And I do take comfort that people talk about data a lot more than they do when they talk about AI now. I think sometimes we've always been very excited about what the outcome is, but I really love how a lot more people now are talking right at the front end of this. And this, again, is what the HRIA tool here is trying to remind us to think about. So we're asking questions here about bias, where we're calling out what protected attributes you should be thinking about. And also you're turning your attention to whether there's any avenues of possible discrimination. You know, my job is in data ethics, and you really do need to recognize that some of these outcomes, though, aren't just about an ethical call. You know, discrimination is illegal. If you're turning your minds to sex discrimination, age discrimination, you know, there may be a risk here that if you're not doing that you're not then designing things taking into account of your legal obligations. And one of the questions here that are asked relates to underrepresentation, and that is a classic tell. And I think, you know, for you to think about the risk that possibly a tool could have. So I'm always very heartened when someone comes up to me and says straight up, we think there's an underrepresentation issue in this data set. How do we start working, or how do we make sure we're thinking about that in regards to any outcomes or mitigation or transparency angles? And I just think that's a really great sort of conscious way to think about it. We've also got questions on design and testing, and here this is really about making sure that you know what the AI is actually supposed to do. Now, I know that sounds sort of basic, but you do need to know, because otherwise you're just sort of using the shiny thing. You need to know what it's expected to have as its output. And this is also where you might want to consider where your human oversight really fits, because what we're really talking here, I guess, about the use of AI in banking is largely augmented decision making here, not a fully autonomous machine. So we will still have humans, people, bankers, etc. involved, and we really want to make sure that we're putting them in the right place. For testing, we're asking, do we have the right types of people involved? We talked earlier about the people who are involved in creating the questions and testing this tool. It's just as important to, when you're doing your testing of your AI, that you've got a very diverse set of views and experiences. It really helps in terms of making sure that it's not just focusing on accuracy, but you are focusing on other types of angles as well. And in our own ethics team, we have considerable like banker experience, we have human rights, legal. But we don't do this alone. We work absolutely with data scientists and the customer advocates. So diversity, again, which is a call out in the tool, is a great way of making sure you've got that real human rights lens on. Finally, we've got to consider bias. So I think, again, considering whether it's an individual or group impact, assessing the reasonableness of fairness to any of those outcomes. These are the questions that often I think people do call out bias, but we're sort of giving it its own section just to make sure you're turning your mind to it. And it's obviously very closely related to the mitigation points. And it's not just saying mitigation, it's actually saying, is there something here that you could do differently to just completely avoid it? You know, earlier the questions are asking about purpose. What do you want it to achieve? Could we be doing something simpler? Have we got to the point where maybe the AI isn't the best outcome, or this particular technology isn't doing what we need to do? And I think one of the things that just strikes me in terms of showing respect and dignity to people in society and in your consumers and your customers is making sure that you are transparent, that you let them know and you have understandable explanations. You know, if the AI is going to work and essentially impact them, then by having respect and dignity and making sure that they have reasons provided as to how things work, I think this is a wonderful aspect in terms of, again, reflecting that human rights angle, and having an ability for people to challenge. Again, I reiterate, these are the big material AI decisions we're talking about. It's not going to necessarily be something that's necessary for everything that's very, very minor. You know, the strength or the utility of the exercise may be sort of not borne out if you have to go into additional hurdles here, but I do think that those are really important things to think about, the remedy angle. And again, that's this going right back to Human Rights 101, you know, we're here to uphold them and make sure people have an ability to challenge if they feel like their human rights aren't being upheld. So there might be a lot to digest in everything I've just said, but that's why you've got the tool online at any time that you want. And also some of you out there might be thinking, this sounds familiar, or maybe we're doing some of this already, but we just don't frame it or call it this. That's great. Traditionally, banks have had a number of risk assessments frameworks. I could peel them off for you. So we're really, really mindful that we're not saying, here's another assessment that you have to do for the sake of it. You know, the design of the tool absolutely acknowledges that it can be tailored by the banking sector, but we want the backbone of the guidance. That's what we want people to incorporate and figure out what's best for their size or current capability and how they translate this and operationalize it in their own space. So for us at NAB, we have included various human rights specific questions in our own data ethics assessment, and we've been doing that for some time. We work with the federal government, the working group on AI ethics principles. At that point, we were considering different things in our principles, and we did a case study, tested those principles, and it was a lot to do with the human rights and the human oversight angle that for us we took away at that point. We've updated learning from the Human Rights Commission's publications, the tech report, and we'll always continue. It's an evolution here. I think you don't really want to set and forget. I think it's constantly learning, and we're really excited that keep this HRIA tool top of mind as we go and explore other things and design our AI framework. But using our colleagues for feedback as well is also very helpful. So yes, looking for international trends and domestic trends as well. So I've been asked to just give a quick conversation about how organisations may adopt the human rights impact tool. I think, yes, you have to really think that not everyone's going to be in the luxurious position of working with the Human Rights Commissioner on a day-to-day basis and designing things like that. So that's why it's so important to have a tool like this publicly available. It's one way to help make that challenge. And so if there's a balance of making sure the guidance has enough information in it, but also that we don't overwhelm everybody. And I think I've probably talked far too long already, so I'm going to just stop because I think we've got a few questions coming up.
We do. Thank you so much, Jade. That was terrific. So people dialing in, please submit your questions via the chat function in the webcast. One of the questions that immediately comes to my mind, just building on that point, Jade, and perhaps this is a question for you, Lorraine. We started this assessment tool in the banking sector, but the applicability of this tool really could be applied to any sector. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about how organisations might apply this, regardless of what industry and sector they work in?
Well, you're absolutely right, Beth, because of course when we're talking about human rights, they're universal. So they're applicable across the board, and certainly there are core aspects of this tool that apply beyond the banking sector, and that we would hope it's more broadly used as a general tool that provides good guidance about, again, how to embed those human rights considerations. But again, in particular sectors, there are always particular risks or particular issues that are front of mind, and that's why we think it's quite useful to have guidance that is tailored to particular industries so that those specific risks and those specific issues can actually be addressed. So it's a need to have a bit of both, enough general guidance that the general principles are really well understood, but enough specifically focused guidance that really practical steps for specific industries can be taken where needed.
Fantastic. I can imagine. I've worked across lots of different sectors, and I can see how applicable and usable it would be across lots of different disciplines. One question that has come through from the audience, just in regards to the tool itself. So we know that one of the challenges of AI is that it's an industry and a technology that is moving very, very quickly. How do you think about maintaining a tool like the Human Rights Impact Assessment tool in the face of these ever-changing technologies? What are you thinking in regards to that?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it goes back to that fundamental approach that we've taken ever since, the final report in the Human Rights and Technology Project, which is that you shouldn't look to design policies or regulation or approaches around specific technologies. You should instead look at the uses. And so that's what the tool is really aimed at. Although it's designed around AI-informed decision-making systems, it's not focused on any one system or any one form of technology. It's a little bit broader than that. And so I think those general principles about how you assess human rights impacts will be more broadly applicable. But again, we do find as new uses and new technologies come on board, you then have to tailor guidance to address specific risks that might emerge.
Right, that's excellent. And I think the Human Rights Commission should be commended in terms of how iterative and how well you've worked in regards to incorporating industry feedback and building out those practical experiences. Say, for example, through NAB's implementation, you're building in that industry feedback. Jade, there is a question here from the audience as well, and I guess it's just in the context of using the tool itself. Once you go through those steps and how does it generate an outcome or an assessment as such? And what steps do you take once that assessment has taken place?
Sure. So the whole purpose of the tool isn't to give you a concrete answer of your low, medium, high, or anything like that, or pass and fail, exactly. Because that definitely probably wouldn't be our place. You'd the detail that you'd need to go into. It really is up to the business to sort of formulate those views, and it may depend on a number of things, and reality too about how actual your mitigation could work. And maybe you're doing your test and you've looked at all these and you've thought about everything, and then the results of your test show up something unexpected, so you'll need to sort of adjust. How we incorporate these things into real life is our assessment process is about having a conversation. So sometimes, a conversation like this may be explaining to people why discrimination, they may understand, oh, okay, there might be bias in here, but really making sure they understand that ethics, while often the formula or creation of law in the long term, we have a lot of laws already in Australia about anti-discrimination. So we want to make sure that those are well understood. But I really just feel like it's the conversation gathering, and we always want people to feel like you've got something out of the conversation, because that's where tools like this can get benefit, because it starts that cultural awareness of knowing of issues and then working together at how to solve them. But it's definitely more of a conversation starter rather than you're going to pop out at the end with something that you can print out and say, I'm okay.
Yes, you've got the check mark. I completely understand. And I think when I was reading the tool, it really did explain how it could be used as a conversation starter. I wondered, in terms of your experience in using this as a tool to drive those conversations, how are you thinking about the different types of people and functions that you need to reach into within NAB? And how do you socialize? There's a question here from an audience member, but how do you socialize the content of the questions themselves in terms of asking them for their perspectives and their contributions? Has there been pushback or concern about providing some of those answers? How are you dealing with that element?
Yes, for sure. Happy to talk to that. So we have a data ethics assessment, and that is a series of questions in a tool that we have. And so either the conversation might be someone wants to use a particular piece of AI. We may start off with that conversation to understand what their purpose is. perhaps give some immediate feedback as to what we think the risks might be based on our experience, and then work with them to understand sort of what are the must-haves, what are the we're not sure, these could be nice to have outcomes. And they go through a really formal, after the conversation, they go through a formal assessment at the bank. So we do take an actual formal approach, I guess, to reviews of AI. And those conversations work in the human rights element. So we ask specific questions. That may not be the approach for everyone. Again, like we're in a different position. We've got a well-established privacy impact assessment process at the bank. So having a data ethics assessment, which includes a lot of human rights content, wasn't an outrageous thing to suggest to our colleagues, but I do expect that it may not be fit for purpose approach for everybody. I think the more you can get comfortable in raising awareness of, hey, these are rights, we need to do our absolute very best and not just take third parties' views that this is a great tool. We need to consider against our own values as well as human rights. I think the way you do it can be definitely managed in perhaps a fit for purpose for your size of entity approach.
Yeah, it's a really interesting element, I think, and at the National AI Centre, we're always looking for ways in which we can make these tools and resources available and relevant for smaller and medium-sized businesses. I wondered if you had any perspectives, and for you as well, Lorraine. You don't want to perhaps pick and choose what you're adhering to, but some of these questions are only going to be, maybe that is the question, are they only relevant to bigger businesses, or how do you think about that fit for purpose adaptation of the tool itself so that it can be flexible depending on the size and the context of the organization?
Yes, because I think there's probably some things that say, ask your human rights experts or talk to your data science team. Not everyone is going to have the luxury of having all of those sort of resources at your fingertips.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, the idea is that, this was designed for banking, but whoever is doing banking may be very varied in size still. But I think there are some definitely general themes here that, regardless of your industry, it'd be really helpful. But it may even just be the beginning. Oh, there are human rights that I need to be considering from my customer base. Now and that could be the beginning for some people. And so the tool is really just starting that awareness for them. I think everyone's going to be at a very different position. But I think it's important to have frameworks, because otherwise you don't know where to start.
Where do you start? That's right.
And you have to you just have to start. I think that's the main thing. I know I've been doing it for 5 years, but when we started, our questionnaire looked very different to what our questionnaire looks like now. And it has got smaller, bigger, all sorts of changes. And I think to tell your colleagues or your business partners, we are open to feedback. We want to know what's working and what isn't, because I never want someone coming and saying, I don't know why I did a data ethics assessment. I want someone going, I got something out of that, I learned something, and my product or process is better for it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Could I just add 2 quick things into that, Beth? One of the things we were really conscious about when we were designing the tool is that it's not designed to be something that's limited to being given to your human rights department and having them go through the tool, because not everybody has that. And so this tool is really designed to reinforce the idea that human rights are everybody's business, and it's something that everyone in your organisation should have some basic understanding of. So we put a lot of effort into trying to make sure the tool was really accessible, even if you've never spoken in human rights language before, or you've never expressly turned your mind to it. And that was the second point. One of the key bits of feedback that we've had certainly so far is from businesses saying, well, we looked at the tool expecting it to be something completely new, but in actual fact, as we went through it, we realised we ask these questions all the time. We've just never put it into that language and never looked at it as a comprehensive process before, because a lot of the questions, when you come down to it, are really just common sense in terms of thinking about what impact is this product going to have and how's it going to affect our customers.
Mhm.
So even though we talk about it in human rights language, and that's very important, at the end of the day, it's really about what impact does this have on people and how can we ensure that we're not causing harm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a beautiful way to wrap up today. I still have a lot of questions, and I know that people have been very active in the chat area as well. If you had one small piece of advice about, or where do you start? And start by starting, I guess, is the obvious one. But what do you recommend people take action on today as a result of hearing you talk? Perhaps we'll start with you, Lorraine. What would you recommend they do?
I think two things. The first is start by starting. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just jump in and actually take that first step. And the second thing is perhaps a good first step is to jump onto the website and have a look at the tool if you haven't done that already.
Jade, do you have any advice?
Sure. I mean, not everyone has access to experts in your own organisation. Use the tools. There's the guidance on algorithmic bias, a huge technical paper on the Human Rights Commission's website. There's a lot of stuff out there. You don't have to feel like you have to know everything, but I agree. It's begin. Like this has been a conversation now, so you're hopefully already thinking about how human rights could be impacted in your business day to day. So just begin.
Yeah, fantastic. And let's hope that together we can all use AI to advance human rights in Australia as opposed to the alternative. At the risk of being entirely self-serving, I would also recommend that audience members do a couple of key things. So please subscribe to the National AI Centre mailing list. We are running these free events all the time, and they're extremely helpful and useful, I think, in terms of making these resources more unpackable. Is that a word? It is now. But we are striving to make these resources available to you so that it helps you on your journey for better understanding AI and the applicability in the context of your organisation. We have heaps of pre-recorded webinars that you will find on our website as well. So that includes economic assessments, resources and templates and tools that you can start using today to help inform your agenda. We would also love to hear from you, so please do get in touch with us on LinkedIn or using our social media channels and email. Again, if you've got any additional content or ideas or questions or gaps that you see in resources that we could help to create to help you move your AI adoption forward, please do get in touch. Lorraine and Jade, thank you once again for your time. Today was incredibly informative. We've had an overwhelming response to the session, and if that is anything to go by, I think people are very much committed to advancing human rights through their use of AI. And thank you so much for your work on the tool. I'm sure it's going to be a very popular resource. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.